My name is Paul Barry. I'm a lecturer at the Institute of Technology in Carlow in Ireland. That's my day job. I'm also, among other things, a technical author, and my most recent book is Head First Python. Today I'm going to talk about Google App Engine, and specifically from the perspective of a Python programmer, which is where I'm coming to it from. One thing that I'd like to point out is that I'm in no way affiliated with Google. I've never been an employee and probably never will be an employee. I'm a user of their technology, but I'm not affiliated to them in any way. So I can look at their technologies from an outsider's perspective. The one thing that I did have at one point, which I loved, was a Google Pen. If that is classed as a bribe, well, there you go, it is. But I have no real connection to them. Now, this means that I can say things about their products that maybe some of the Googlers can't or are maybe not allowed to. But it also means that sometimes I may get things a little bit wrong because my perspective may not be totally technically correct because I don't have the Google insider knowledge that Googlers would have. But hopefully, as you'll see, I can show you some of the things about some of my own thoughts about App Engine, and they're my opinions, and they're not influenced by Google in any way. So that's just a bit of a disclaimer before we get going. I thought what we would do today is in the Head First books, we have a technique that we use which allows us to deal with some technical issues in a bit more detail than we would typically do within the text. And we have a little call-out section called No Dumb Questions. It looks something like this, which we have on the screen right now, where there's a question that's being asked, hopefully by the reader of the book, and then it gets answered by the author. So I thought what we'd do today is, let's not worry about the one that's on the screen right now. What we'll do is I will present a series of there are no dumb questions for App Engine, and we'll work our way through, and hopefully in the process of doing that, I will answer most of the questions that you might have at this point, and if not, there's plenty of time at the end for some more. So here we go. So question number one, what exactly is App Engine? Well, here's one potential answer. It's a platform as a service technology. So what you get from Google is a cloud-based sandbox within which you can run your Python web app. So you build your Python web app, and then App Engine is a place that you can run that Python code. And it's a platform, so you don't have to worry about the operating system that's running. You don't have to worry about selecting database technology. You don't have to worry about selecting a web server. All of that is provided to you as a service, as a platform by App Engine, and you just provide your code. So what does this mean for me, the Python programmer? Well, the answer is that you don't have to worry. It's all sorted. When you develop in the cloud, whether it's Google's cloud or anybody else's, you concentrate on your web app's code and not on the technology platform that runs it. So if you're like me, you've probably spent days configuring Apache, you've spent days configuring email services, you've probably spent longer than days configuring database and tuning database technologies. With App Engine and with these cloud technologies, you don't have to do that. So really what the whole idea behind it is that Google does the worrying for you. So you just write your code, you then deploy it to App Engine, and App Engine then runs it, which means that you get to spend a bit more time like this, hopefully, where you can relax a bit more and not worry as much about your deployment environment because Google are building and supplying the deployment environment for you. So it's a place for you to run your Python code. Next question, which versions of Python are supported? Now, at the moment, there are two. When App Engine was initially created, they used Python 2.5, and that was the first and only language available for App Engine when they first released it. They released App Engine initially as a sort of beta technology, preview technology, and Python 2.5 was the language that you used. Then what they did was they released the 2.7 version of the App Engine runtime. And it obviously is better than the 2.5 one because there's more stuff in it, and 2.7 is a better language than 2.5. And they updated and sort of improved some of the runtime environment. There is currently no support for Python 3 on App Engine. If you're a Python 3 programmer, well, then you're out of luck at the moment. Which sort of brings up this question, doesn't Guido work for Google? And the answer is that yes, Guido van Rossum does work for Google, and in fact he works for the App Engine team at Google. And he does the vast majority of his work is working with the current App Engine technologies and improving them. But despite this, there's still no support for Python 3. Now, as the author of Head First Python, I'm a big fan of Python 3, and it's a technology that I try at every possible occasion to push people towards. So the fact that the creator of Python works for Google, works for the App Engine team, and we still don't have Python 3 there, even though there's noises coming out of Google that that's something that they're looking at. We don't have it yet, and basically it just makes me feel like this, which is a little bit sad, and what can you do? So, the next question. Does App Engine support other programming languages? This is something that I get asked when I present it to students. And it does, and I try not to dwell on them, because when I dwell on the other languages, I end up making a little icky face, not unlike this. And then I end up having some impure thoughts, and my impure thoughts tend to be something like this, which I know is very bold, but I'm allowed to do that because it's my webcast, and I'm a fan of Python, and if I get a chance to have a go at some of the other languages, I will. Java was introduced after Python. It has got almost all of the Python functionality is available to you in Python, not all of it. And it is a supported, and it is a sort of standardized language and platform within the App Engine environment. Go is still experimental because the language itself is relatively new. It's only recently gone to version 1. And you can use it within the App Engine environment, although because it's experimental, I would suggest that you may not want to bet the farm on it, because it is changing. When something's experimental on App Engine, it means that it's changing. The API can change underneath you. You have to be very careful, and you really don't want to play too much with experimental features within a live system. So there are other languages, but again, I think that because it was initially a Python platform, that Python is actually the language that you want to concentrate on when you're looking at App Engine. And there are lots of places in the Java documentation where it suggests that you do something by downloading the Python SDK and putting the following little bit of code in and doing the following thing in order to do it. So although the Java technology is there and it supports people who have a large investment in Java, it does trail behind the Python technology to a certain extent. But there are other languages there. This next question is one that I get asked a lot by my students who have had some prior experience with web development, and when they come to me in the later years of their course, I tend not to mention this technology at all, and I tend to talk about Python and other technologies, and this is what they always say. They say, well, web development, what's the story with PHP? And my answer is always the same, and it is this. Really, seriously, who cares? I mean, I'm not a fan of PHP. I know that you can run PHP on top of some of the technologies that are available in App Engine. I think there's a plugin or a technology that lets you run it on top of the JVM or whatever. But I mean, I'm not a big fan of it, and it's something that I haven't really looked at. There are workarounds to doing it. If that's what you're into, good luck, but I'm certainly not. What I need to be able to do with App Engine, I can do quite happily with Python, and that's where I concentrate my efforts. And that's what I tell my students. And they don't ask me about PHP for the rest of the year, which is great. Next question. Isn't Google App Engine just another web application framework? This is a common misunderstanding, because it's not really. It provides an environment within which you can run web application frameworks. So you can get support for some of the existing frameworks that are out there. So it's more than likely that whatever your current existing web application framework is, if you're in the Python world, that you can make it run on App Engine. The likes of Django and Web2py are supported. And if you go to those technology sites or also within the documentation within App Engine, you'll find lots of hints and instructions for how you take your existing Django or Web2py or whatever your pylons maybe or turbo gears or whatever the technology is, you take it and you can get it to run on App Engine. So that path exists for you. But really what App Engine is it's a web application framework platform. It's a platform for you to build a web application framework on top of or to run your existing one. It comes with a lightweight framework called webapp2, which is actually, although they call it lightweight, it's actually quite capable. It also has Jinja2 templates, which are a templating library, a third-party templating library that are compatible with Django templates but add a few extra bells and whistles and also add a performance boost over the standard Django templates. So if you're familiar with Django, Jinja is not really that big a stretch, and they are included with App Engine. So you can build a web app which is Whiskey compatible. You can build a web app 2 web application. You can use Jinja templates, and it's just like any other platform that you use. The fact that it's running on App Engine is secondary. So App Engine provides this platform that you can build these technologies on top of. Can I run my existing Django application on App Engine? Well, I've already alluded to this, and the answer is yes, you can. There are a couple of project websites that I'd like to draw your attention to, and one is the Django non-Rail project, which is it's not necessarily an App Engine project. It's a project designed to allow you to run Django on top of a non-relational database. So if you're a fan of maybe Rake or MongoDB or CouchDB or one of the NoSQL type technologies, Django no non-Rail will allow you to work within that environment. And they've done some work with this technology to allow it to work within the cloud as well within App Engine. And at the allbuttonspressed.com website, there's links to the Django non-Rail technology, and there's also links to a project called Django App Engine. Both of them have fiddled with and changed Django in such a way that it's really easy to run your developed application on App Engine. So you build it locally in Django on top of Django non-Rail or Django App Engine, and then when you're ready, you deploy it up the App Engine, and away you go. And there's not really an awful lot of extra work. My students are very fond of these technologies because some of them are very fond of Django. And once they get introduced to Python by me, they then spend a bit of time looking at web frameworks, and they all seem to congregate around Django, which is not surprising because it's good technology. And then when they get shown App Engine, the first thing they say is, can I run my Django application on it? I point them at these resources, and they're up and running the next time I talk to them. So it's good technology. It's been tested, and it works very well. So yes, Django on App Engine is a good fit. Can I run any Python code on App Engine? Yes, sort of, or within reason. The reason I say within reason is that you're running, you do have restrictions placed upon you. So the question is, well, what are the restrictions? If I've got Python, I know what I can do with Python if I'm running it locally. What can and can't I do with Python when I run it on Google's cloud? Well, the answer to this is that you are running within a Google sandbox. So you can play, but you can't break out of the sides of the sandbox. You have to do what Python restrict, or what Google restricts you to do. So the Python that they're running on App Engine is a customized version of Python. It conforms to 2.7 or it conforms to 2.5, depending on which version you go with. And it will appear to be very like what you're used to using locally, but there are certain things that it won't let you do. So we can have a quick look at the big sandbox restrictions. The first one is that you cannot write to the file system. It's platform as a service, so you don't know what the file system is. You don't know what the operating system is. You don't know what your database is, what your web server is. You have no idea. Google are looking after and worrying about all that for you. You cannot write to the file system. But you can read from it. So if you have, say, a flat file of data that you want to have access to from within your web app, you can put that flat file in the directory or folder that contains your App Engine code, deploy that to the cloud. It gets deployed up to the cloud, and then when you ask to open it, App Engine will open it for you. You just can't write to it. So you can read from it, but you can't write to it. You cannot open a socket on App Engine. So if you have a web app that wants to do some sockets programming or communications with some other system, you cannot do that either. You're just restricted from doing it. They don't allow you to do it. App Engine does provide an API called URL fetch, and what it does is it allows you to go and get information on third-party systems using sort of REST or HTTP type requests, where you request it from the system and the information comes back to you. So although you can't open sockets and communicate that way, you can communicate with other web services using URL fetch. You can't make any systems calls. Again, you have no idea what the system is underneath you, whether it's Linux or something else. We just don't know because the App Engine people don't tell us. It's a platform, and they provide the API, and they say, if you want to make a systems call, you can't. So it will just fail. And the other restriction is that you cannot respond slowly to requests. Now, what we mean by this is that when a request comes into your application on the cloud, it has to be responded to within a specific period of time. And they've recently increased this. It used to be 30 seconds to respond, and with the more recent versions of App Engine, they have bumped this up to 60 seconds, which, depending on how you look on it, may be long or may be short. Certainly, if you look on it from a web request perspective, 60 seconds is an awful long time to wait for anything to come back from a web request. In fact, most users, if they don't see something back within a couple of seconds, they've gone and clicked on something else or opened up another window and gone off somewhere else. So 60 seconds on the web is an absolute lifetime. App Engine has this restriction in place so that if there's something that goes into some sort of loop or causes an error and doesn't get caught, or just sort of sits there or gets confused or delayed or whatever else, the App Engine runtime after 60 seconds will kill that process, so that there's no sort of leakage or there's no processes hanging around, and the system can sort of maintain some sort of consistent state. So you've got to ensure that things happen within a specific period of time. Now, there are times, of course, within web applications when you need something to occur in the background and you need it to occur over a period of time that may or may not be longer than 60 seconds. And App Engine has a number of APIs that allow you to deal with that. It has sort of the equivalent of cron jobs, which allow you to set up cron jobs and have things occur at certain periods of time. And it also has backends, which are like long-running processes. And those technologies, the cron jobs and the backends, from my experience and from my understanding, are not restricted to the 60 seconds limit. You don't have to have those things happen quickly. So if you've got some background processing that you need to run maybe against your DataStore, your database technology, or whatever your data is, you can run that as a backend or as a cron job, and you don't get killed after 60 seconds. So there are ways of getting around the 60 seconds thing, but regular web requests must complete within that time, and generally you want them to complete within a much shorter period of time, because users tend to be incredibly impatient on the web. So those are the sort of main restrictions that are placed on you. Obviously, when it comes to extensions that you might be using, if your extension uses C, if it's a Python module that uses the C interface, that will not work on App Engine because there's no way to compile it up online. So pure Python modules tend to be where you have to go and where you have to concentrate. But it is an optimized Python environment that you're running on within App Engine, so they tend to run quite quickly anyway. But you need to be careful of that. Which third-party Python extras come with App Engine? What the people who created the 2.7 runtime did was they looked and they said, okay, what are some of the really popular modules that people might want? Some of them are already in 2.7 and some of them aren't. And what the App Engine people have done is they've made this list available to you. And here's the current list. We've got Django. Now, I've already talked a little bit about Django, but the Django that's in App Engine tends to trail the current version by a little bit. I think, I'm happy to be corrected on this, but I think the version that's in App Engine at the moment is a 1.2 version of Django, which is a little old at this stage. You've got LXML, you've got Jinja 2, markup safe, NumPy, which is a standard module that comes with 2.7 anyway, but has quite a bit of C code in it. That's available to you. The Python imaging library is available to you. The crypto technologies a WebObs YAML and setup tool. So there's a bunch of things that are already there that are available to you and are included, and you just call them. You import them and you call them, and away you go. You don't have to worry about getting them installed or uploading them or anything else. They're part of the 7 technology. There's a different list for 2.5, and what I would suggest is that if you are new to App Engine and you're building a new application in App Engine, target the 2.7 release. Don't worry about the 2.5. It's still there. It'll probably be supported for another number of years, but like most of the effort and most of the new stuff is occurring within 2.7. So that's where I would suggest you target your development. What if I need a custom Python module not supported by App Engine? So let's say you've got some module, either you've written the module yourself or it's a module that you've downloaded from PyPy, and you would like to have that included as part of your web application. And one that I've had experience with is the WT Forms, the What the Forms, which is a forms processing library that's quite popular within the Django world and within the Python world. And it's pretty straightforward. All you need to do is you get the code, you put it into the folder that contains your App Engine code locally. You then build your App Engine application locally. You call the code within the module, and when you deploy, App Engine will automatically load that module up into App Engine for you and make it available to you. So it's a relatively painless process, and all you really need to do is just copy around a few folders and drop them in the right place, and the App Engine deploy mechanism takes care of everything else. Pretty straightforward, and it works a treat. Obviously, you have to then manage that module. If there's a new version of it, you have to update that version that's locally within your App Engine and load it up and test it again and everything else. But it's pretty straightforward to get going. Included with 2.7 is, I haven't looked at this, I've seen it referenced a couple of times, is the ability to upload and run PYC files. So if you've got some source code that is particularly important to you that you don't want to load up into App Engine, even though the App Engine code that you load up is private to you, you can just upload the PYC and you're able to get at that functionality within the cloud. So there's a number of ways of sort of working with your code. You can either upload the source code, upload the PYC, and App Engine with Python 2.7 supports that. Okay, how easy is it to get started? Well, it's actually very, very straightforward. There's 4 steps. The first is that you sign up for a Google account or Google App Engine account. If you already have a Google Mail account or a Google Plus account or any other Google account, it's very easy to add App Engine to it. When you do that, you get 10 free applications that you can play with within the App Engine system. If you haven't got any Google account at all, you can go to appengine.google.com and sign up for just an App Engine account. And it also gets you 10 free ones. And whatever account you create, you then have the option of adding on Docs and adding on Mail and adding on Plus or whatever else, because you can just attach services to the ID. So you go and you sign up. It takes no more than a couple of minutes. Then you download the SDK for your chosen platform. There's SDKs available for Windows, for Linux, and for Mac OS X. Again, only takes a couple of minutes. Then what you do is you unpack and install that technology. Very straightforward. The Windows and Mac OS X installers are, as you would imagine, graphical. You click on a few buttons and it gets installed. The Linux install, you download the file, you unzip it or unpack it or unbz to it or whatever, and it creates a directory with Google App Engine in it. You stick it in your home directory and you're done. And then what you do is you write run and test your web app locally. So everything in the SDK allows you to build your application locally without doing anything with the cloud. It's not a technology that you would use to run something locally and allow people to see it in production, specifically your users. It's designed just for developers to play with locally, and then when you're ready, you deploy it to Google's cloud. And there's a pretty straightforward mechanism for that. This is a picture of the graphical front end for App Engine that exists for Mac OS 10. It looks almost the same as this for Windows users. It's just not as pretty, but it's got the same functionality. And if you're a Linux user, because Linux users are real programmers, that's a joke. Everybody's a programmer. Everybody's a real programmer. Linux programmers like to do things at the command line. The command line to run a developed web app is the first one there, the dev app server line, and the one to deploy it is the app config line. And I think there's actually a small mistake there. After appconfig.py, it should say update and then the name of the application. The graphical front end has got a big run button over on the left-hand side. It's got a deploy button over on the right-hand side. And basically, you load up your code, you click run, and you run it. You load up your code, you click deploy, and you deploy it up to the cloud. It's that straightforward. All you have to do is remember your password and your user ID that you created your Google account with. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So, I mean, getting the thing onto the cloud is real easy. What's the minimum amount of code I need to write in order to get going? Well, actually, you don't need to write any code to get going, because what you can do, well, unless you're a Linux programmer, you'd have to write a tiny bit of code. But if you're a Windows or a Mac OS 10 user of App Engine, you can ask that graphical front end to generate a new application for you, and it generates a little tiny Hello World program. And I'll show you the code that gets generated right now. The first thing that happens is you get a file called app.yaml, which is a configuration file that describes your application to App Engine. This is the one that gets automatically generated by the tool. I'm running on Mac OS 10. I click the new file, new application, and it generates this file for me. I call this, because I've got lots of imagination, I call this my new app. So I created this application called my new app, and this configuration file was created. It identifies the application, so there's the name. It identifies the version of the application, so you can have any number of versions, and this version number is important because when you deploy it to App Engine, if you deploy a version number that's already up there, you'll replace the one that's up there. If you increment that number, it will deploy up to App Engine's cloud, and then you can go to your App Engine dashboard and switch on the new one and keep the old one around. So there's a way of doing sort of some simple version control of applications on the cloud. Just identify the runtime. Here I'm identifying Python 2.7, so this is a 2.7 application. The other one for Python programmers here is if you've just got the word Python, it's going to use Python 2.5. I'm going to use the version 1 of the API, which is the API version 1, which is Google App Engine's API. It's currently at 1.6.6, and it's been version 1 of the API since the start, and there's no mention anywhere of version 2. So it'll be a long time before we see a version 2 of the API, and version 1 will do you for quite a while. And then with the 2.71, there's some extra requirements in the release into concurrency, and you have to specify whether your code is thread safe or not. It defaults to that it is thread safe, and so you have that in your configuration file. So that all gets generated for you, as does the rest of this file, which is your handlers, which is what happens when certain requests to your web app come in. So there's one there, and again, it's optional, but we've got some configuration there for what happens when somebody requests favicon.ico, which is the little picture that you get up beside some websites in the location bar of your browser. And again, here what we're saying is, look, here's the URL. If somebody asks for favicon.cio, it's a static file. It's called favicon.ico, and I want you to upload it when you deploy. So you're telling App Engine what to do with that file. If any other request comes in, there's a regular expression here, .star, and that says absolutely anything else that comes into this web application gets sent to an object called main.app. And that's going to live in a Python file that also gets generated for you initially if you use the tools. And we'll have a look at that code in just a second. And also there's what we're saying here is we're saying, look, this application uses version 2.5.1 of WebApp 2. That's also optional. You don't need to include that, but it gets put in when you automatically generate this. So you describe your application to App Engine using this configuration file. So that tells App Engine about, so it's metadata. It tells App Engine about your application. What you also have is a tiny bit of code, and here's the code that gets generated. There's a bunch of comments that get generated. I just deleted it out of here because we don't need it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code here. We import webapp2. We define a class called mainHandler, which inherits from a thing called webapp2.requestHandler, which is a standard WSGI web application framework type technology. So it should be familiar to people who have used the WSGI technologies before. Then we define some methods that respond to specific HTTP methods. So the request to get something results in a method called get being called for that request handler. And all we're doing here is we're spitting out the string hello mum. That's the only change I made. The one that gets generated by Google is hello world. I thought I would just change it a little bit and say hello mum. And then what we do is we create a thing called app. If you remember in the previous slide we had main.app was the object that the request got sent to. So here's app inside main.py, and it gets its value from calling webapp2.wsgI application and passing in a bit of a data structure. The data structure says, look, associate the forward-leaning slash with the mainHandler class, and what will happen is when the forward-leaning slash comes into this application, that request will be dealt with by the get method that lives in mainHandler, and mainHandler spits back the value hello world. So it's pretty straightforward and it's pretty easy. It doesn't really do an awful lot, and whether we could call it a web application or not remains to be seen. But we generate that configuration file, we generate this code, we deploy it to App Engine, we go to our location and we press enter on our location bar, and up pops the word hello mum. So, I mean, relatively straightforward, relatively easy. It's really easy to get going, and then what you do next depends on what your application requirements are. You define and create a bunch of URL handlers. You define and create a bunch of classes that inherit from webapp2 request handler, and you build your application from there. And it's relatively straightforward to get going. How easy is it to debug in the cloud? Well, surprise, surprise, it's a little bit tricky, because just like it is to debug in any web application environment, I mean, what my students always struggle with is that when things go wrong, they get a blank screen in their browser. If they're unlucky, if they're lucky, they get a 500 or a 400 message or something, and which highlights the fact that something has gone wrong, and then they're trying to find out what has gone wrong. There are various mechanisms that we all know about from within the Python world that allows us to get at the information that the back end is producing as a result of some error, and there's sort of similar things like that in App Engine. Obviously, the sort of twee answer is, well, you really shouldn't be debugging in the cloud. You should be debugging locally, and only running and testing in the cloud before you actually switch it on. Debugging should always be a local activity. But I mean, there are technologies and bits and pieces that Google provide that make it a little easier. Locally, there's a thing called the interactive console, which when you've got your application running locally, you can go to a specific web address which gets you access to back-end information about your application. And one of the things that it has is what they call the interactive console, which is a little window that you see here on the screen. And what you can do is you can type some code into that window, click on the Run Program button, and the results get displayed on the right-hand side. And this is smart in that it knows about your application. So if you've defined certain things within your application, maybe you've got some database definitions or other bits and pieces, they are available to you within this interactive console. So you can use it to run little snippets of App Engine Python code and see what the result is without having to go through the run it, start it, something goes wrong in the browser, go back, have a look at the logs, take it from there, and sort of go round and round in circles sometimes. This interactive console is sort of like the little Python shell that we all know and love, except it's within the App Engine environment, and it knows about your application, so it is actually quite cool and can be quite useful. On the cloud, there's a pretty detailed logging mechanism. This is the dashboard for an application that I have running on the cloud. It's a pretty simple sort of web server application, and it has A lot of login information in here, so again, we're just seeing a little bit of it here. And again, this can be really useful when things go wrong, because you can go in to have a look at the log, and the log will have the output from Python if things have gone wrong, so you'll see your stack trace and any other messages that Python has generated. And you also have access to this information locally, but there tends to be much more of it within the cloud. So there are some helps there to get you through those debug humps. Can I access the Python shell within my web app in the cloud? So, I mean, we all love being able to drop into the shell, and what the App Engine people have done is they have produced a thing called the Remote API, which lets you do just that. So you can configure within your configuration file for your application, within that metadata file, that app.yaml file, you can configure it to allow you to have a remote shell. And when you access that remote shell, you can then access the internals of your application, and it just looks like the Python prompt. So I'm pretty sure you can do it remotely. I think you can also do it locally. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but again, that functionality is available to you. So there's ways to get at the internals and to get at that shell. And I mean, this is something that, from a web application perspective, Python programmers are used to, because I'm pretty sure there's something similar in Django and the other technologies as well. And what about my existing data? So code is one thing, data is another thing entirely. Can App Engine host my data for me? Well, yes, it can. In fact, App Engine, as well as being this platform for running your Python code, is really, if you sort of look at it, it's really a huge, big platform for storing and accessing data. It's built on top of Google's BigTable database technology, and the technology that's in App Engine is known as the DataStore. This is a highly replicated, highly scaled, large, distributed database system that Google maintains for you. So if you've got a lot of data, it gets spread out all over the globe. It's backed up, everything else, you don't have to worry about it. So yes, you can put your data into App Engine. In fact, that's what Google wants you to do. And that's obviously why you have applications, because applications are useless without data. So yes, you can do that. You use the DataStore. Excuse me. Here's another question. I have a lot of existing SQL-based infrastructure. Do I have to throw it away when I move to App Engine? The DataStore technology that's in App Engine is no SQL-based. There's an API that you use within your code to access it. But if you've got a lot of SQL background, a lot of SQL expertise, and a lot of data in SQL databases that you want to move into App Engine, you're not stopped from doing that. There is a technology in App Engine called GQL, which is the Google Query Language, which looks a lot like SQL on the surface. It doesn't have all the features that SQL has. There's no way to do joins and things like that. But it looks a lot like SQL. So if your SQL that you currently have within your applications is relatively straightforward, you may find that it's an easy port to put it into GQL. There's also recently, one of the big additions to the App Engine world has been the addition of MySQL in the cloud, which is using the MySQL technologies as your database backend instead of Google's DataStore. It's something that I haven't really looked at in any great detail, because I actually like the DataStore, and I haven't got a requirement to use MySQL yet. And also, it's been something that has been experimental for quite a while, and then there was a closed preview and everything else. And it's only recently that it's sort of coming out of that and being made widely available. So I tend to shy away from the functionalities that are experimental, because, as I say, they can change under you, and I tend not to like that. I tend to go with the stuff that's standardized and is approved and part of the product. But they've done this with the MySQL technology. So if that's where your expertise is, you don't have to throw it away. You can bring it with you. You get access to an interface that's just like you're used to with your current local or server-based MySQL technologies. It's just running in Google's cloud. So you've got choices here. You've got the DataStore using Google's API, which is a programmed API within Python. You've got Google's DataStore using GQL, which is a programmed API that looks like SQL within your code, or you've got the use of MySQL in the cloud, which is just SQL and everything else that you're used to. So there's lots of options there. Do I have to use the NoSQL DataStore? No, you don't. It's entirely up to you and your application requirements. I like it. I think it's kind of cool. I like the API to it. There's two at the moment. There's one called DB, which has been with App Engine from the very start. So that's going back to 2008, I believe. So that's getting old, but it's rock solid. And you import the DB from the Google APIs, and then you can get access to a programmed environment for working with your data. Guido has also worked on NDB. I'm not sure if the N stands for new or stands for next, but it's seen as not so much a drop-in replacement, but certainly an alternative and a replacement for DB. And what Guido did was he took a look at DB, decided he didn't like it as much as I do, and decided to rewrite and build an alternative programmed API. And it's very well engineered. Again, it's something I haven't looked at in any great detail because up until quite recently it was an experimental feature as Guido was developing it. But now it's actually part of the product and it's a standard part of the 2.7 Python runtime for App Engine. And it's something that I will look at eventually, primarily because Guido has built it. But also because I want to see how it differs to DB, and although I like DB and I'm quite happy with the functionality that I have there. So, but you don't have to use it. You can use GQL, you can use MySQL if you want. You're not forced to go down the DataStore route. App Engine's idea of NoSQL that's embodied within the DataStore is that, well, you've got schemaless design. And you've got what I call versioned entities. So what I mean by this is if anybody's sort of worked with MongoDB or any technologies like that, this will not be new to them. But typically with an SQL-based database, you have to decide up front where everything's going to go and what you're going to call it and the structure of your database. You design your schema. You then build your application, and then if your schema changes, your application's in trouble because your schema has changed and you've got to then go and change all your code. Within the NoSQL type databases, this tends not to be as big an issue because what you can do with App Engine, you can decide on an initial format of your data. Maybe you've got a name, an address, and a telephone number. So you use DB and you create a name, address, telephone number, and you start putting some data into your application. And then down the road, you decide that you need the fax number as well. And you add in that as a new field. What App Engine will do, what the DataStore will do, is it will keep all that old data which only had the 3 fields, and it will allow you to add new data with the 4 fields, and it just keeps them all in the one DataStore. They have different names within the App Engine world. They call a row of data, they refer to that as an entity, and they refer to fields, like where the rows and columns intersect, they refer to those as properties. And it's an object data store, so you're not storing individual data atoms or data items within your data where the row and column intersect. You're storing objects, and what you can do is you can put a list of things in there. You can have these version entities, and it's been designed to scale well both for reads and for writes. So they've put an awful lot of effort into making it as flexible as possible. And when you're developing applications, web applications specifically, where the requirements are changing often, it can be a godsend when you don't have to worry about the underlying networking or underlying database technology. Like I absolutely love MongoDB for this because I can use MongoDB and I can change the format of my data as much as I want, and I'm not having to worry constantly about going in and changing my code to reflect that because I've got old data that's got an old format. MongoDB just handles it, as does App Engine. So there are benefits to looking at it as a data store for new applications, even if you are totally convinced that all your data is forever going to live within an SQL relational database. I think it's worth having a look at what NoSQL brings to the table, specifically within the web setting. And App Engine is very close to what the others are doing. And there's until you've experienced it, there's nothing quite like taking a Python list and sticking it into a field in a data store and then having it come back as that list later on and not having to worry about converting it from one thing to another or worrying about normalization or any of those things which are worries within the relational world. App Engine does support transactions. It doesn't support joins. So there's swings and roundabouts here in relation to what your requirements might be for your application, but it's well worth exploring and experiencing to see if it can improve your web application development experience. So it comes highly recommended from me. Are there any similar cloud-based technologies available to me as a Python programmer? So is App Engine the only one? Well, there's a whole load of them. Microsoft Azure is one that pops into my mind. I haven't really looked at an awful lot of them because I've been quite happy with App Engine. And in my opinion, none of them have Python at their core in quite the same way that App Engine does. I mean, App Engine was built to support Python from the start, and it initially only supported Python. It's got some of the world's best Python programmers on the App Engine team. Guido is there. I mean, App Engine is like Python web application programming nirvana as far as I'm concerned. There are other technologies that are out there. They have Python APIs to them. They just don't have the same appeal as App Engine does for me. But again, depending on your particular circumstances, it may be worth looking at. But there are other ones out there. Next question, can I use App Engine as a web server without actually writing any code? So let's say you have a static website that you just like to host on App Engine for free. Can you do it? The answer is yes. And here is the config file that you would use to do it. This is something called, I've called it static app. It's got the metadata at the top there. And I've got some handlers. And basically my handlers say, look, if somebody looks for a slash, if they send me the default URL request, give them back index.html. If they send me anything else, go and find it for me and give them back that. That's basically what this configuration file says. There's no code associated with it. You put all of your HTML and all of your CSS and all of your JavaScript and everything else into a folder. You stick this file in there, you deploy it up the App Engine, and you've got a static application running within the cloud. Just while we're on this slide, it's important to point out, see that key value pair there where it says static files index.html and static files \1. That's important because when you have static files in App Engine, you want to tell App Engine that they are static, because what App Engine does is it is being built to tailor and to optimize for the type of content that you're creating. If you've got dynamic content, your dynamic content creation technology, your code, will run on one set of App Engine servers. Your static content will live on another, and those servers have been optimized for their task. So the static servers have been optimized to serve up static stuff quickly. The dynamic servers have been optimized to serve up dynamic content quickly. And by using this static files designation here in your configuration file, you can give App Engine a hint about where it should put your files, and then you're assured that when they're being served from the cloud, they're being served in the most optimized way. So that's a key point. Next, no dumb question. Is App Engine free? The answer is that yes, it is initially. When you sign up and you get your 10 free applications, you can run those applications for free, and you'll only start paying when you have more than 5 million page views per month. There's a whole bunch of quotas that are made available to you, and when you've deployed an application, you can go to the dashboard, you can look at the quota link, and you can see what your quotas are. Some of them are daily quotas, some of them are weekly quotas, some of them are monthly quotas. You can see how your application is performing, and you can watch it. And initially, it's all free. So if you're a startup or if you're just playing with App Engine, just trying to learn it, trying to get it something going, experimenting, you can do all of that for free. It's very socialist, is what somebody said to me just during the week. App Engine is socialist, which is, you've got these large applications that are paying for their service, and you've got the rest of us who are using smaller applications not paying anything. Which is great. So you can get going for free. It's sort of like Google Sites, if anybody uses Google Sites, or Google Docs, or Google Mail, or any of those other Google services, which are all free. I mean, if you start to want to have a service level agreement, if you want to do more with them, well, then you've got to approach Google and you've got to come to some fee arrangement. But initially, it's free. If you do, what's the catch? Well, the catch is if your traffic increases beyond those 5 million page views a month, you're going to start to have to pay, and you'll have some costs. But the idea is that if you are generating that amount of traffic, you must be getting a revenue from it. So then maybe you should be paying for it, and Google get their cut, as would your ISP or anybody else that's providing you with cloud services. But initially, it's free. What does paying get me when you do sign up for billing and you decide to hand over your credit card details and tell Google, okay, Feel free to charge me if I go beyond my quotas. And what you get is you get bigger quotas. And it used to be, I'm not sure, I haven't checked this recently, but it used to be if you signed up for billing for an application, you would automatically get double the quota, and they wouldn't charge you anything. So you'd go up to, for example, 10 million page views per month, and they wouldn't charge you anything because you'd provided your credit card details. Once you went beyond that, you then had to pay. But you initially got these extra quotas. You get priority support, and of course you get Google's undying love and devotion because you're now a paying client, and that's what Google wants. You have a service level agreement, and there's various sort of mechanisms and various billing options available to you. How does billing work? Well, I've yet to be billed. I do a lot of work with App Engine on smaller sites, and obviously from a training and a teaching perspective, there's other people who are taking sites and building them and potentially getting billed. I haven't been billed yet, lucky me. So I don't really know, but I do know it is a complex setup. The thing you really need to do is when you decide that you want to switch on billing, you have to really be careful that you understand what it is you're signing up for and what it is you're going to be billed for. There's lots of information on the pricing and features and what you get when you pick the various options, and you really need to be careful and really need to know what you're at. And it's all available on the on Google's website through the App Engine documentation. What if Google eats my credit card? You've signed up, you've given your credit card details, and the next thing you get your bill, and there's like $2,000 owing to Google on it, and it's like, oh my God, what have I done? This can happen, and you will be warned, of course, if you're generating a lot of billable traffic. And there are some horror stories. I mean, if you search the net, you will find some horror stories where that has happened to people, where they've got the credit card bill, they've switched on billing, got the credit card bill, and fallen off their seats when they've seen what Google have charged them. You need to be very careful that you understand what you're signing up for. There's also, the counter-argument is that there are things that you can do to keep your billing to an absolute minimum. And recently when Google moved from preview App Engine into a real live, honest-to-God supported product, what they did was they changed how billing worked, and a lot of people got stung because they changed it, and all of a sudden people who weren't being billed suddenly were. And there's a couple of articles where some people have gone off, looked at how they built their application, looked at how the new billing mechanism works, changed their application, and dropped back under the threshold and continued to run their application for free. So there's a bit of work that you have to do, and you really do have to pay attention to what you're doing, and just be aware that Google will quite happily charge your credit card, as will anybody. They won't do it maliciously, but if you exceed your quotas and you consistently exceed your quotas, you will be billed for them. You can watch it on your dashboard. You can keep an eye. You will be warned. Just be very, very careful. Am I screwed if I later decide to move my App Engine web app off Google's cloud? So you've gone and you've created your app with App Engine's technologies, you've deployed it to the cloud, and then you decide it's not for you and you want to move it to somewhere else. It really depends how much of the Google API you've used. If you're primarily building a system that uses WebApp 2 and Jinja 2, they can both be used. They're both products that can be used outside of App Engine. They're included with App Engine, but they're not specifically linked to it. You can run those locally within Apache or whatever else. So you can do that. Obviously, you can't do that with the DataStore, but again, depending on how much of the DataStore you've used, if you haven't used a lot of the API, you may find that it's a relatively trivial exercise to take those API calls to the DataStore and convert them into MySQL calls or convert them into MongoDB calls, and again run that locally. So it really depends. If you're using a lot of the APIs, things like channels, which is a way to send information sort of from the server to your application. If you're using the back-end technology, if you're using the cron technology, if you're using other bits and pieces that are specific to App Engine, it's a much harder port. But if you're using those standard things, well, then I think it's much easier. But you're not stopped. I mean, the code, you can download the code from App Engine. It used to be that you couldn't, but they changed that recently. You can go and get your code back, and you can use it in whatever way you want. And again, remember that your code is Python code. It's not some weird code specific to the API that lives within this cloud technology. It's Python. So depending on how you write it, it might be easy or difficult to port to some other technology. Is this not the equivalent of vendor lock-in? The web equivalent of vendor lock-in. So once Google's got you, you can't get off, you can't move it. Well, we have the answer from the previous question, but it really depends on your point of view. If you decide that you're going to deploy to the cloud, no matter which cloud technology you select, you're going to have to give up some of your freedoms because you're going to have to live within the rules and within the restrictions that are placed upon you by that cloud technology. App Engine has a set of restrictions. We've talked a little bit about some of them. I mean, if you're happy with them, away you go. If you're not, you may want to look at something else. It really depends on what your point of view is. I don't think Google deliberately go out of their way to lock you in. Obviously, they want you to deploy your applications to App Engine and to continue to use it. But I don't think they do anything, at least I have seen nothing, that would make me suspect that they're doing some stuff that's deliberately designed to keep you locked in. There's some APIs that are specific to Google, and if you use them, well, they're Google APIs. What do you expect? But so, I mean, it really depends on where you're coming from. What's the uptime like? It's not bad. It's not quite 5 nines yet, but it's getting there. I mean, they do a lot of work to try and keep App Engine up and running. Obviously, now that it's left preview and gone into a live product, I think it has. There's a lot more effort on Google's part to ensure that it stays up and running, and I think it is. It's doing quite well. There are outages like anything. I mean, even yesterday in the news they were talking about Facebook outages. So I mean, it happens to all of them, and nobody is immune to this. But I mean, the uptime is pretty good with App Engine, and I think for most apps it's going to be fine. How active is App Engine development? Since Christmas, the App Engine team have been releasing an update about every 4 weeks or so. It used to be a little longer than that, and not as regular, but certainly every 4 weeks or so since Christmas, and certainly it might even correspond to since they've moved from preview into a real live Google product, that we're seeing updates every 4 weeks or so. And again, when you run your SDK locally, every time you start it, it'll go and check to see if there's updates, and if there are, it gives you the option to download and install it and keep current. The most recent one was 1.6.6, which was less than 2 weeks ago. And again, I'd expect another one about the middle of June. And they tend to announce it. They announce it on Twitter. They announce it on they email you. They announce it on the email lists, and they have here's what's new and whatever else. And they tend to be getting better all the time. So it's nice to see that there's a definite schedule of releases, and things are improving. So that's certainly most welcome. What if Google kills App Engine just like it did Buzz and Wave? Now, that is, I know it's one of my questions, but it's a good one. That is a worry, of course, because Google are known for taking technologies that we're all in love with and destroying them, or deleting them. And certainly there was a cull that occurred just after Larry Page became CEO, and or that's when it appeared to as a result of that happening, and certainly that is something that you could worry about. I don't think you really need to, because I think now that App Engine is a real live Google product that people are paying for and that is being used by some very large organizations, the chances of Google deciding to kill it is lessened considerably. It's also used internally by Google, and they run a lot of their internal applications on it. The big sort of outward-facing application that was created for it was the website that supported the royal wedding last year in the UK. That was built by Accenture, so there's large consultancy corporations, companies that are using App Engine for development for clients. And I mean, I can't see it happen unless things go really pear-shaped for App Engine. As it continues to grow and get more users, and more users are paying, I think it's going to create money for Google. And I think as long as that occurs, Google aren't going to get rid of it. But you never know. But I mean, I think it is something that's one of the pillars of Google's future because of the application development that Google and others are doing on it. I have clients that use Google Apps. Can I link my App Engine web app into their app's infrastructure and use the existing authentication ID? So let's say I was actually asked this question at a training session last month in the UK. somebody asked this, and I couldn't answer it initially, and in about 20 seconds, one of the course attendees had the answer, and he said, yes, you can. If you've got a lot of people using Google Apps internally, then you build an application for them within that organization, and you want them to use the same login ID and credentials and whatever else, you can do that within App Engine, no problems. There's just a box that you tick, and App Engine looks after it for you. Can I use jQuery with App Engine? You can use whatever JavaScript you want with App Engine. It's classed as a static file. You put it into the folder that contains the static files for your application, and it gets uploaded and deployed from App Engine. Or you can link to it from some other source on the web, because when jQuery gets downloaded into your browser, it doesn't really care where it's coming from. It's just another request that the browser is making off into the server. So you can use whatever JavaScript you want. Where do I find out more? Okay, well, here is the cheeky answer. I couldn't resist this. I have a chapter. Of course, this is a Python talk. You have to have Monty Python in it somewhere. I saved the best for last. I have a chapter in my Head First Python. Chapter 10 is based on App Engine. It's based on the 2.5 runtime, because that's the one that was active when I wrote it. Takes you from 0 to deployed application in about 40 pages. And it's the basics, and gets you up and running. There's also a bunch of Python-specific App Engine books. There's a lot of App Engine books. A lot of them target the Java corporate world. These three target App Engine. All of them, App Engine for Python. All of them are based around Python 2.5. The one on the top right by Dan Sanderson, who had a webcast 2 weeks ago, and has another webcast in 2 weeks where he will do a deep dive into Python on App Engine, and will be much more code than what I've had. Dan is currently updating that book, and it's due for an update, I believe, sometime this month. I hope I'm not putting Dan on the spot here, but it is due soon, and it is actively being updated, and that's probably the best App Engine book out there. The one on the left, top left, is by Dr. Chuck, is how I know him. It's a great tutorial for App Engine and tutorial for web development in general, designed and geared towards the student market, I would say. The programming App Engine is, from Dan, is geared towards more of a professional programmer, and it does include both Python and Java, and from what I can tell, it will not include Go until Go has become a standard and adopted language as opposed to experimental. So keep an eye out for Dan's new book, and also keep an eye out for his webcast in 2 weeks' time. Also, Wesley Chun, who will be familiar to Python users, Python programmers, Wesley Chun's latest version of his core Python book, which is now called Core Python Applications, he has about 80 pages on App Engine, which is relatively up to date. Because it's only just out. He covers both Python 2.5 and Python 2.7. And he also talks a lot about things like running open source App Engine. There's some open source projects that he points people at, and some of the web application frameworks and whatever else. He has about 80 pages in that book. Wesley is also on the App Engine team in Google. He's a developer advocate. And his book is excellent, as were his previous two editions. This one is great because it has a lot of stuff on App Engine in it, so that's worthwhile having a look at as well. And with that, I think that brings me, well, almost to the end. Your best source for App Engine is the documentation. There's the link to the Python documentation. If you just go to developers.google.com/App Engine, you'll get the top-level documentation, which includes documentation for Java, Go, and Python. That one will take you directly to the Python documentation, and that's your best source. The one that's online, I believe, the downloadable documentation dates back to February, so we're all waiting for an update for the downloadable one. But the one that's online is the most current, generated and built from the most recent release, which is 1.6.6. And that, I believe, brings me to the end. There is a link to the slides for this talk, which is available on my web server, paulbarry.itcarlo.ie/orm-Google App Engine GAE.pdf. And if there's any other questions, I'll happily have a go at answering them.
Thank you, Paul, for a great webcast today. We do have a lot of questions that came in, as you can imagine. Are you able to see them in that Q&A tab?
I'll just click on it right now. Okay, let me just try and make it a little bit bigger. Okay. Okay, well, I just run down through them quickly as best I can, or?
Sure, that would be great.
Okay. Yuri asks, how to plan monthly costs for App Engine. Front-end instance counts increase very quickly on my free plan. I mean, I don't really have an answer to that. You have to be very careful and make sure you know what you're doing. And email Google and ask them and tell them what do I need to do. Marcel, does your Head First Python book offer a detailed example for creating a web app and Google App Engine? Yes, it does. I just talked about that. And about 40 pages takes you from zero to deployed. And you have a bit of fun while you're doing it. Can we install custom softwares like Hadoop, MapReduce, Cassandra on Google App Engine? Google App Engine has a MapReduced technology that you can download and play with. I believe it's a Python API to that technology that allows you to run MapReduce on App Engine. From what I understand, I don't know about the likes of Hadoop and Cassandra. Maybe Hadoop. I think Hadoop's a Java technology, so you might be able to run it on the Java side of the house. But certainly MapReduce, there is specific support for that. Does App Engine risk being discontinued? Hopefully not. Hopefully Larry and Sergey won't pull the plug. I've already talked about that. I think that would be unwise of them. Next one. Sorry, it's a very small window here. What is the best practice to deal with uploads without access to the file system? There is, as well as the DataStore, there's a thing called the Blob Store, and I think there's an image store. So you can, or there's an image store API. You can, if different static files of different types can be dealt with different ways within API, within App Engine. Just check the documentation. Can I use other databases like Postgres? No, the only other one is MySQL at the moment. How does it compare with Google or Amazon Web Services? I don't know because I haven't looked at it. I would imagine quite favorably. Is App Engine a true cloud technology, or is it more like an application server along the lines of Tomcat? I'm not sure what I mean by cloud, though. Any thoughts would be appreciated. I mean, the idea that my idea of cloud is that the technology runs on a platform that's not managed by you. So yes, from my point of view, it is a cloud platform. You get a pretty high-level API access to that functionality, and Google looks after an awful lot. There's a lot you don't have to worry about because they do. So I would say yes, it's a true cloud technology. Which is best, Google App Engine or Amazon Web Services? I can't answer that. What are some of the disadvantages of Google App Engine? Without being specific to specific applications, I can't really answer that in a general way. I mean, obviously you are giving your code and your data to Google and asking them to mind it for you, and whether or not that's something that you want to do or you feel comfortable with is entirely up to you. I mean, I'm, for one, all my emails in Google, a lot of my docs are in Google, my calendar's in Google, I use Plus a tiny bit, not much. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff I'm already giving to them. If you look at what people give to Facebook for nothing, it's unreal. But yeah, the disadvantage is that they have your data on their server, they have your code on their server, and if you upset them and do something that's outside the terms of reference of their agreement that you have with them in relation to running your application on their server, they can switch it off. Again, I can't imagine that happens a lot, unless there's some strangeness occurring. But you do need to be aware of what the restrictions are and what the terms of reference are as well. And what's the best way to scrape 1,000 servers delivering temperature data at a specific point in time? I don't know. I wouldn't have an answer for that question. So sorry, Karsten. That's one for somebody else. I think that's them all. Is it, Yasmina?
Looks like it, Paul. I'm not seeing any additional ones that have come in. Did you want to leave our audience with any additional information?
Well, just to give it a go and try. If you're interested in running your web app on the cloud, App Engine is an easy way to do it and worth the look.
Perfect. Paul, thank you so much for such a wonderful webcast today, for sharing all your knowledge and expertise with us. We thank all the attendees that attended today, and we hope you benefited. We'd like to let you all know we have pushed out a special code for you all in the group chat so you can get Paul's book. Lots of good information in there. If you like what you heard today, there's a lot more in that book, and as a thank you, you can get it for a really good price. We'd like to let you all know our next Google App Engine webcast is going to be on June 14th, presented by Dan Sanderson, Python for Google App Engine. Please register for that. It is free, and you're going to be in for a lot of good information on that one as well. Again, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, bye.